Hi everyone, Arnold here, santamuertemagic.com. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's video, which is being made by special request. The topic of today's video is Catholicism necessary for Santa Muerte's success? The person who requested for me to make this video and to discuss this topic was basically asking whether or not a person can work with Santa Muerte, can build a relationship with Santa Muerte, without necessarily believing in the Catholic religion, the Catholic idea of God, the Catholic idea of Jesus Christ, etc. While I may have touched on these points in the past, I think it is fair to address directly this relationship between Santa Muerte and the Catholic faith, because so much of what is written about Santa Muerte in the modern age, especially what comes out of Mexico and what is written in Spanish, is tied sometimes strictly, sometimes loosely, to Catholic traditions and ideas. If you read enough books about Santa Muerte, especially those books that offer prayer and ritual instructions, you will notice that many include terminology which is apparently Catholic. And I myself have heard it said by some devotees in Mexico that Santa Muerte can only be approached through Jesus Christ. While I do not doubt that you can have success petitioning Santa Muerte through Jesus Christ, I think this has more to do with the fact that Santa Muerte, as death itself, accepts us all, and less to do with some monopoly that Catholicism might claim to have over Santa Muerte. Speaking from experience, my own and those that have been shared with me through the website, there are plenty of people who report success working with Santa Muerte without any appeal to Jesus Christ, without any appeal to the traditions of Catholicism. If anybody ever tells you that the only way to petition Santa Muerte is through Jesus Christ, I think it would be fair to ask them if they have ever tried to petition Santa Muerte in any other way. I would be willing to bet that in most cases they would admit no, they've only ever gone through Jesus Christ. And let me make it clear, I am not trying to sling mud at or discount the experiences of anybody who petitions Santa Muerte through Jesus Christ or through the Catholic faith. The point I want to make is that just because you have found a way that works for you, it does not mean that somebody else cannot find another way that works perfectly well for them. This is a common trap that I notice in the world of spirituality and in the practice of magic, where just because one person is taught to do something a certain way, or just because one person on their own discovers a certain way to do something effectively, they think, well, this is it. This is the end-all be-all, and anybody who deviates from this is wrong. If you pay attention to basically any aspect of the world, I think you would agree that the old adage about skinning cats is usually true. There is more than one way to achieve an end. So, is it possible to work with Santa Muerte, to build a relationship with Santa Muerte without any of the trappings or traditions of Catholicism? Absolutely, I think so. And this doesn't have to do with some kind of divine revelation I've received. It's simply that whenever I am asked my opinion about some aspect of Santa Muerte, I consider what I know to be true about death. And what I know to be true about death is that we all, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, will one day die. Death will one day come for us, and every day that we are allowed to live, we are all in fact moving one day closer to death's embrace. Just as death is a universal truth, so too I think access to Santa Muerte is universally available. Now, this being said, I think it is fair to at least recognize the cultural connection between Santa Muerte and Catholicism. It was the conquistadors who brought the idea of Catholicism to the shores of what is today Mexico, and it was the conquistadors and Catholic priests who literally forced Catholicism onto the indigenous people that were living in the region. While it is true that it was the conquistadors and Roman Catholic priests who brought the image of death personified to the indigenous people in the form of a skeleton wielding a scythe, it was the indigenous people and their descendants who started the custom of praying to the image of the skeleton. It was the indigenous people who essentially deified the imagery of the skeleton with the scythe. Now, it could be argued that this was a Santeria type tactic. Maybe the indigenous people were masking their indigenous gods with iconography that was being forced upon them by the Spanish priests and conquistadors. Another explanation I have heard is that it was essentially a miscommunication between the Catholic priests who were trying to teach Catholicism and the indigenous people that they were subjugating. Under this explanation, the image of the skeleton with the scythe was basically an instructional aid. You have to remember that the first generation of Spanish conquistadors and Spanish priests who arrived in what is today Mexico had no way of communicating with the indigenous people that were already there. But they, the priests, wanted and perhaps felt they needed to spread Catholicism as quickly as possible. You also have to remember that the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is essential. It is foundational to Catholicism. So it is possible that in trying to convey the story of the death and resurrection of Jesus, Catholic priests used the skeleton imagery to illustrate the death of Jesus. And who was Jesus? The Catholic priests would have taught that Jesus Christ was God in flesh. Now, to the indigenous people hearing this story, it is easy to imagine that they might have been a little confused by this concept. Wait, so you're telling me that your God, the most powerful force in the universe, the creator of everything, was defeated by this skeleton figure? At least some of the indigenous people must have been thinking, why would you pray to the God that was defeated by the skeleton? Wouldn't it make more sense to pray to the skeleton that has the power to kill your God? And if this explanation of miscommunication is true, it would explain why the image of the skeleton with a scythe was able to evolve into not just a symbol for death, but into something that could be prayed to in and of itself, something that could be considered holy or godlike in and of itself. Anything with the power to kill a god must surely be powerful enough to defeat an enemy tribe in combat, or surely be powerful enough to defeat a drought that threatens famine. So is there a connection historically and culturally between Catholicism and Santa Muerte? Sure, this is undeniable. But to think it was a connection that has always existed, or for some reason needs to be maintained, I think is just not true. The fact is that before the Spanish Empire landed on the shores of what is today Mexico, there was no concept of a Santa Muerte, of a saint death or a holy death, as she is depicted today in her Grim Reaper form. That concept arose out of a bloody history of forced Europeanization and Spanish colonization perpetrated against an indigenous people. Those Spanish conquistadors and priests, so far as we know, never would have thought to petition the personification of death or the Grim Reaper for miracles. To them, that image or personification of death was a boogeyman to be avoided. It was the problem that they might pray to Jesus Christ to keep them safe from. And the indigenous people in what is today Mexico, while they did have deities believed to rule over the land of the dead, or who were considered gods of death, so far as we know, never would have dressed up death to look like a European Grim Reaper, if not for the arrival of those conquistadors and Roman Catholic priests. And it is this point that illustrates my overall point, and that is that traditions change and they adapt over time. And if they are capable of changing and adapting over time, then there is no reason why they cannot be changed and adapted further, I think. And if that means that you want to uncouple Santa Muerte from her Catholic history, from her Catholic chains, then I think you should be free to do so. If you are afraid that this might anger certain quote-unquote cultural purists or certain cultural gatekeepers, who argue that things should stay a certain way just because that is the way they have been for hundreds of years, then I guess my question for you is, why are you seeking the approval of fellow human beings when it comes to your own deeply held spiritual beliefs? If the Santa Muerte shows a willingness to work with you, directly or through some other energy or archetype, without any connection to Catholicism, then isn't her approval enough for you to be satisfied? With that, I think I'll start wrapping up this video. In summary, I do not think you need any connection to Catholicism to work with and build a relationship with Santa Muerte. Go ahead and ask around and you will find people who are having great success with Santa Muerte without Catholicism. Is there a history between the two? Sure, but it didn't always exist, and if anything, that history only goes to show that traditions can change over time. According to the historical record, magic and miracles can spring forth from completely new ideas just as easily and with just as much power as they can spring forth from old ideas and established traditions. So do not be afraid to experiment. Do not be afraid to forge your own path. You may be surprised by what you find. Hopefully I've explained everything clearly, but as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. You can send me a message through the website, through the Patreon Messenger system, or through the Discord chat server. Thanks again for watching. Until next time.